Hello, in this class we're going to start looking at forms. Forms are a big deal when we're programming in PHP. Almost every single page we write is probably going to be a form of some description, and we kind of go from form to form when we're working with a program in PHP. So they're a big deal. There's nothing particularly difficult about them, there's just lots of different little elements we need to look at. Now, so I'm going to build up a form here quite slowly. When I'm done, it'll be in example 16.html, but I'm going to build it up bit by bit. Now, inside our HTML document there, the most important tag we have here is the form tag, and at the end of the form there we have /form. So form is what we use to specify a form in HTML. Now, here as attributes for the form tag we have method, post, and note there that post is in uppercase. There are two ways to process the value submitted to a form. One is post and the other is get. I'll explain the difference between those later. Another attribute is the action attribute in the form tag. And here we have action equals HTTP blah 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 blah. There is a URL in there. Now, when we click on the form, when we submit the form, the browser goes looking for this page here, this URL. And this is one that we've set up here at CIT just to help students when they're processing their forms so they can see that everything is working. In time we will substitute this with our own PHP value, with our own PHP page that we want to use to process the form. But for now, here's one I made earlier, as they say on the cookery shows. Now, looking here, we have an input tag. And you'll notice straight away that it's one of those tags that doesn't occur in begin-end pairs. And we have input name equals something and type equals something. So there are different types of inputs that we can have in a form. Right now, this form just has text inputs. And then each input in the form has to have a name. I'm just going to change this to customer name actually. So each input in the form must have a name. And when we submit the form, the name value pairs get sent to the server. So this will send cust name along with whatever values we enter in. This will send email and whatever values we type in, and this will send comment and whatever values we type in. And then finally there's an input here which is type submit, and that's the button that we're going to use. So I'm going to save this, and then I'm going to look at that in the HTML in the page itself. So here we can see the three inputs there. Now, I've put in just plain text here, name, colon, email address, colon, and comment. I'll put in a colon there as well. So you can see now this is what the form looks like. Now, so when I click submit, this is going to send off all of this data to this PHP script here. All this PHP script is designed to do is to send us back the information that we sent it, so we can see that it's working. So I'm going to say submit, and it says there's a name. The name of the input was cust name and the value was Colin. The name of the input was email and the value was my email address. And the name of the value here was comment, and this was the value that was transmitted. Now there are different kinds of inputs in HTML. HTML5 introduced a whole new bunch of them, and some of them allow for auto-validation of the form. So if I put in here that the email address is in fact type email, HTML5 or the HTML will know to expect this to be an email address. So if we save that, I'm going to say, now let's say this time I just put in some gibberish for my email address. Let's look what happens. So this is type text, but the email address here, that's expected to be an email address. And looking at this, we can see just from the looking at it, we know it's a dodgy email address. It's not a valid email address. So we click submit here. Look, we get this error message. Please include an @ in the email address, because that's not a valid email address. Now, I didn't have to write any code to make that happen. Using this input type in HTML will force the user to put in an email address or something that looks like an email address in there. And if there's not an email address in there, then the submit will fail. So that's something in the past you had to do yourself, writing client-side code to validate the input. But for certain types of information, HTML can do validation automatically. So that's pretty handy. Now let's build this up. I've added some more code here. So after the customer name, email, and comment, I've put in a text input, which I'm going to call username. That's fair enough. And here I have next to that, or underneath it, a new type that we haven't seen yet, a new type of input called a password. And I've given that the name secret. And so when we look at this in the form, we will see something like, I will just not distract us with that there now, we see that there. Okay? And if I I'll put some other things in this form as well that we're not going to look at just yet. Also, if we look down here at the bottom, I have added a value attribute to the submit type. And so this puts some text into the submit button. So I put in Lex Rock. And I've also added another type, which is the reset button, and added a value attribute there. And the reset button will clear the form. I always expect the submit to be on the right and the clear to be on the left. I've been to a few websites where I spent time entering data and then I accidentally clear everything just because the buttons seem to be in the wrong order. I always expect the submit to be on the right. Maybe that's just me. No. So look up here. You notice that when I type text into the password field on the form, you don't actually see it. Okay, you don't actually see what's typed in. Okay, I'm going to submit that now. Let's rock. And you see, of course, it does actually submit that. So here you see the password has been sent by the form to the PHP server, but you don't actually see it when you're filling out the form. Okay, so that's the only difference between the password type and the regular text, is that it's not shown on the form. Okay. Next up, we have some radio buttons, they're called. Okay, and a radio button is an input where you have a set of them and only one can be selected at any one time. So their name comes from the fact that a long time ago radios had buttons for presets, and you could only push down one of them. And if you push down one, the one that has already been pushed down would pop back up. So you select one from a set. Okay. You'll notice that here we're using the same name for each of the 3 radio buttons. But we have a different value for each one. Okay. So if you select the first one, the value male will be sent with gender. Okay. If you press the second one, it'll send female. If you select the third one, it'll select gender. But the important point here is that we're using the name each time, the same name. Now that's fine because only one of these is ever going to be sent. So the name, the value is only going to be sent once. There's only going to be one thing coming out of this. Okay. This is in contrast then with checkboxes. So the checkbox, you can have a bunch of different options and each one can be selected or not. So checkboxes can be selected and deselected independently of one another, whereas radio buttons affect one another. If male was selected and you select female, then male isn't selected anymore. So on a pizza topping, for example, for pizza toppings you might have peppers or you might not have peppers. That doesn't stop you having jalapenos or not. Although the peppers might be redundant if you had jalapenos, but that's not the point. Okay. You'll notice that when we are sending checkbox values, each one gets its own individual name. Okay. So if I select all of them and we look at what's sent to the server, we'll see that topping 1, peppers is sent. For the name topping 2, olives is sent. For topping 3, jalapeno is sent. For topping 4, onion is sent. Interestingly, if you don't select the box, then nothing is sent. So here we have not checked jalapenos. When we send that to the server, we see that we have topping 1, topping 2, and there's nothing there for topping 3. If we did with the checkboxes as we did for the radio buttons and gave each one the same name, then things would get complicated. And what would happen is only the last one we selected would be sent, because the subsequent ones would overwrite the earlier ones. So that's why we have to give them all names. The same would happen with radio buttons, except radio buttons we can only select one anyway, so it doesn't become a problem. But for checkboxes we have to give each one an individual name, unless we do something else. Now let's look at a few more different type of elements that you can have in a form, different kinds of inputs. I've added a few more. It's tempting to think that you could make do with just regular text input, but really there's more to this than just the cosmetic appearance of the elements. You can do a lot of validation as well, so we'll see that now in a second. But if the browser is expecting a certain type of thing and you put in something else, well then it can have a little tizzy fit on your behalf. Now HTML5 introduced a number of new and interesting input types, and we're going to have a look at some of those. So you can specify that you want the user to input a color. Now this is an unusual one, but at the same time you could see how it's useful for developers. You could imagine in a content management system where you're setting the color of text or a blog post or something. Whereas before, manually, you would have to figure out some way of specifying the color and writing the code to do all that. Now you can have the browser just ask for you. Now colors come back as hexadecimal values, which we won't explain. We don't need to know the details of that, but it allows you to specify a color. And what's interesting is that this is a call to the operating system, essentially. So depending on the kind of device you are running your browser on, this will appear differently. So you can tell, if it wasn't already clear from the video, that I'm doing this on a Mac. And so I can get to choose my colors this way, or whatever. So whatever way the operating system allows me to select my colors, I can use that. And so if this was a tablet or some other kind of interesting device, the input might be optimized for that particular device. You notice this too is a call to the operating system. So if I do this on a different browser, I'll get the exact same thing. Not just similar, it's the exact same thing. The browser's just asking the operating system to do it for it. Of course, on a different machine, you'll get a different result. Support for these new types of input was patchy in the beginning, but they're fairly universal now at this stage. We can ask for a date, and again, there was a time this would have required quite a lot of coding on the part of the developer, but now it's just a thing we can ask for. So I can pick a date, whatever, go to the past, whatever the case may be. We've all seen these online when booking flights, whatever. What we're not so aware of is the fact that maybe, 5 years ago, maybe a bit longer, people had to figure out a way to code this, whereas now it's just built in. Okay. There are a number of options you can use as well when you are specifying various things. You can constrain them in some way. Text input, really, there's not much you can do, but with this date, for example, here I'm saying I want the minimum date to be after 2000. So you can specify maximum minimum. So for example, if someone is booking a seat for a child on a plane, and let's say the child must be 6 years old or younger, well, when you're specifying the date, you can set it so that they must enter a date that's within the appropriate range. And you can just specify that in the code, and then the browser will just, give out on your behalf, which is handy. So if I go back all the way to, is there a quicker way? What's the quickest way to go back in years? If I go back to, so it's not offering me 1999. So I was going to say party like a 1999, but I can't go to 1999. So I can only go back as far as the 1st of January 2000. So it won't let me select the last day of 1999. That's because I've set the minimum there. So that can be useful. We can specify a month. So this is pretty much like specifying a date, except it's really just an input for a month. So the date doesn't get sent to the PHP server. So when we send this information off, all we send is the month and the year, not the date. It would be interesting to see if this looks different in a different browser. Enter a month. Okay, so you see here in Firefox, Firefox doesn't do months. It does years, all right. Notice as well, look, did you see there how this looks quite different? So although I'm only inputting a year, I'm only inputting a date, just as I was in the other browser, this browser handles it differently. So the way it works is going to be slightly different depending on the browser, but obviously you're going to get the same information at the end of the day. What's really useful also is that the input can be optimized for the device. So if you were to do this on an iPhone, for example, you would get the way the iPhone selects dates. It would be in a way that was appropriate for a touch device. So I haven't managed to select a date here yet, have I? Just giving me, well, I'm going to try something in 1999 just to be bold and see what happens. And it didn't actually ask me for, it didn't let me put in a data. Now this is unusual. Okay, it's interesting that the range is there. It's showing me the different ranges there, but not the day I want. And it won't quite let me do the 31st of January, will it? Okay. If I change it manually, what would happen if I change this to 1999? Will I get away with it? Now see here, look how it's showing me this red here, and it's giving out, saying you can't pick the first 1999. Now what's really cool is I didn't have to write any code to make that happen. I just specified the range, and then the browser is giving out to me on my behalf. Now I know you're thinking big deal, but if you were doing this 10 years ago, this was a lot of work to make this happen. So it's doing it now all by itself. Okay, enter a month. It's not really having anything here. I wonder if I just put in some gibberish, what would happen? It doesn't look like a month either, does it? Anyway, no. So there you go. So depending on the browser, you may get a slightly different appearance or even a different level of support. Here, here, here. These date pickers aren't doing well at all, are they? This is Safari, which I would have expected to do a better job of supporting the new things. But Chrome is coming out tops there. So you can see that support still isn't universal for all of these. Now, next up, if I want to enter my age, here I have specified a range of values. Okay. So in the input, you can say it's a number, and you can also specify then a min and a max. So this input is going to expect a number. If I don't give it a number, it'll be cross. The browser may give out to me, maybe cross on my behalf, which is handy. And also I've specified a min and a max, which means I can only enter values between 0 and 105. So if I put in 105, whoops, 105, it's happy enough there. Because it's a number, it allows me to do this. This is kind of annoying because sometimes it allows you to do this up and down thing, increment and decrement, where really it's not appropriate, you know. And you can see there, it doesn't let me go beyond 105. If we look at the other browser, again, I can go here from 0 to 1, 2, 3, all up to 105. I can also enter it manually. If I do 106, what happens? It's going to give out. Not a surprise there. It's behaving as it did up there. What happens if I do 106 here? It's not giving out. Interesting. Another type of input is for a range. And so with a range, it's gonna send a value out to the server, but it typically gives you in the browser a slider that you can slide backwards and forwards. You can specify the min and the max. I mean, I think you have to specify the min and the max. I presume there's some defaults somewhere, but it would be very unwise not to use min and a max. And you can even specify the step that you go up, so you can maybe go up in 5s or 10s, depending if you wanted. So like I said, the range typically gives you a slider. Here we don't see the actual values being previewed. No, I thought sometimes you can, depending on the browser. Let's have a look here. So again, we can range them down. I can feel with my fingers that it's like giving me, 11 options, all right. It's a bit sticky when you're pulling it across. What's going on here? And again, yeah. Some interfaces, it gives you some indication of the actual value. So this would be 10, this would be 0. So you can slide that up and down like that. That's a useful interface element. You can easily imagine scenarios where you might want that. This is a very important one, is the phone number. Of course, a person can enter a phone number as text. That's not a big deal. And in the past, that's what we did. We took in, when we wanted someone's phone number, we asked them for their phone number, and we took in a text field. But what's really cool is that if you are entering a phone number, for example, on an iPhone, the keypad will only show the number keys because you don't need the letter keys. And so the interface adapts to the kind of data that it's looking for. If I put in a character there, we'll see what happens. Will it give out later? I might do the same here, see what it does. So this is Firefox. Just put in a letter there. Okay, it's happy enough with that. We'll see now what happens in a minute when we go to submit these to the form. Will the browser have a tizzy fit, or will it just accept that? It may, of course, accept phone numbers because Americans are in the habit of including letters in their phone numbers as a mnemonic device for remembering them. So that could be it too. We'll see. We'll go here. Again, you can just enter a time. The interface for that isn't especially inspiring, is it? I thought it might show me a little clock or something. If I say 17, I'll say 1765 just for the laugh to see what happens. Okay, and it bumps that down to 59. That's fair enough. I'm going to try that again here now. 17. Okay, 5, whatever. 67. Come here, you. 6. What? Okay, yeah, I did. You couldn't see this because you didn't see my fingers, but as soon as I did 6, 0, of course, as soon as I said 6, it went straight to 0, 6, because, of course, it couldn't be anything else. So if I said like 4, 5, you get 45. But if you say 7, well, you get 07 straight away. So, okay, it's constraining what I'm putting in there. And this allows me to put in seconds, I guess, which is interesting. Is it? Don't know what it's doing there. Oh, it's not putting in seconds. Okay, I thought that was going to give me seconds. That's looking for AM or PM. That's interesting. PM, if I say 17. Okay, so yeah, I thought when I was putting in 15 earlier that I made a mistake, but no, it was insisting that I put it in 12-hour clock. Okay, it's interesting. How does it deal with that here? Okay, here, I guess you can have whatever you want. Now, let's fix that typo there. There's not a website, it's a website. Website. I won't save that just now in case I screw everything up. Here you would put in a URL then, so you can just do blah, 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 blah. And again, the browser will be cross if you don't put in something that looks like a URL. Okay, so here it's having none of it, so I'm going to have to put in blah-blah-blah.com. It's still not happy. I need to put in the http://. Now it's happy. I have to reduce my age here if that's going to go away. Bring this back to 2000. If I want to get anywhere with that. Okay. Yep, so I think that's everything there now. Now there are also a bunch of constraints or restrictions you can put on various inputs, and I have a slide here that goes through those, so we'll have a look at some of those. So disabled is one, and that can basically disable the input. Okay. Max we've already seen, you can set the maximum possible value of something. Min we've already seen, you can set the minimum possible value that's allowed to be for the input. For an input field you can specify the max number of characters. You say max length and that'll specify the maximum number of characters. You see that a lot on comment sites or whatever, where they only accept a comment or inputs of a certain length. Pattern is a complicated one that specifies a regular expression that can be used to check the input value against. We haven't dealt with regular expressions yet. I have a feeling we're going to have to deal with regular expressions, so we will do that at some stage, but not right now. Read-only specifies that the input field is going to be read-only, so it can't be changed by the user. So that what's there on the screen stays there. The user can come along and change it. Required specifies that you must fill out a particular field, so there must be something put in. So you might require, for example, someone's name and their email address to sign up for a service, but maybe not require their phone number. Size will specify the width in characters of an input field. Step will set the intervals for an input field. If it's one of those ones that has values, numerical values, instead of allowing, like for age, for example, we allowed 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You might decide for weights that you're only taking to the nearest 5 kilos or 10 kilos or something. So you might go like 0, 10, 20, 30, 40. You can specify the interval. And then if you specify a value in the attribute, if you use the value attribute in the specification for the input, you will be setting the default value. So what I'm going to do is, I was surprised earlier when I wasn't required to put in an email address. I didn't put in an email, left the email address blank, and I thought it was going to insist that I put something in and that it be a valid email address. But if you put nothing in, that's okay too, right? So because that was optional. But if I say required, now I won't get anywhere unless I put in an actual email address. Okay, so if we if I remove this here and I put in, I don't know, no, so here now, wait, that wasn't it actually, it was here, wasn't it? This was the required one. Which one did I make required? Yeah, the email address. So if I put in gibberish, it's going to give out to me eventually. In Firefox, I think it's going to give out to me right away, as you can see there. If I don't put anything in, it's not giving me any sort of indication that it is required just yet. Okay, so just put all those in there, select these here. I'm going to select red just to show you something. Super duper red here would come back as, this is the value here that would be sent. Look, this hexadecimal value here, FF0000, is how you would specify pure red in hexadecimal. Date this century, whatever, this one here, we've seen that work. Enter age, I'm going to put in 106 and see what happens, because remember we specified 105 there. And phone number I'm going to put in 087 and some gibberish just to see if it gives out. And so, okay, so some of these things now are not good to go, so it should give out to us. So we say let's rock here. The browser's having a tizzy fit now on our behalf. So the good thing is that the person who wrote this page didn't have to do any of the work here. It's just built into the browser. And I'll keep coming back to that point, but I'm really impressed by that. You're probably like, well, you know, duh, of course. Okay, let's say cit.ie. So that should be happy now. Yeah, we see what happens with 106 here now. Seconds, let's rock. Look, value must be less than or equal to 105. Very good. So it's forcing the inputs here to be the way they're supposed to be. Let's say again, enter URL cit.com. Oh yeah, it must have HTTP, blah, blah, blah. Now, I'm fascinated here that's letting me away with this phone number. I think that's very cheeky. And here we have the spinning beach ball of death, actually, if you're familiar with the technical term. Okay. That's not good. Okay, so I magicked that away there, so moving swiftly along, we'll look at the same thing again now in Firefox. So this was the only required one, wasn't it? .com. I just want to show you that the password does actually appear. Oh look, that's interesting, it's telling me the connection is not secure. Very good. Okay, blah, 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 blah. Just select these here. I wanted to show you the red going through. Well, I'll pick our red, just so you can see. That'll have a high red value. So they'll probably start with FF or some high value. And this is what we're interested in here. I wanted to see what happens when we send that in there. Okay, let's rock. And go. And don't save. So you can see that all the things that have been passed show up here. the password actually arrives in plain text, which is important to know. So that's not ideal. You would need some sort of solution for that particular problem. This was why the color that I turned out, that shade of red, turned out to be expressed in this form here. That's a hexadecimal value, or 3 hexadecimal values rather. I won't bother explaining that. We don't need to know that. Okay, we may look at it later. You can see there, this is the age, the points, that was the slider, and this is the phone number that came through. This is the URL. Okay. So these name value pairs get passed from the browser to PHP. I'm going to look at how that happens now. So let's take a look now at how the data gets from the form into PHP code that might want to use it. So we have 2 methods for submitting. There's post and there's get. In both cases, the data is wrapped up in an array of name value pairs, where the name and the value, the name and the value, the name and the value all get sent, and that's in a big array. Now, if we submit the data using post, that data is in a super global variable called post. So a super global variable is a variable that all of the PHP program has access to. If we submit using get, it's stored in a super global variable called get. Interestingly though, if data is sent using get, we can actually see it in transit. What happens, the data gets appended to the URL. And so we can have a look at how that actually looks. So here I have code in example 17, and you'll see that instead of post, I've used the get method. Okay, and it's just a name, email address, and comment. Nothing unusual there. And when we look at that in the browser, we see the form that we're expecting. So if I put in here Dan demand, I say Dan at cat.com or .ie, whatever, do blah 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 in there. Okay, when we submit this, we can see that cost name Dan the man gets sent, email address gets sent, and the comment gets sent. But look up here, look at here in the URL. So we had question mark and then the pairs of values that were actually sent. So here the email address was Dan. Because at signs can't be embedded this way, it had to do an escape here to send that. And basically all of the information that's being sent is passed across the internet as part of the URL. So it's there in plain sight for all to see. So that would be an especially poor way to send sensitive data. Whereas with post, there is at least the option of some security. If we change the get to post and make sure to save it, and then we look at the form in the browser, it looks the same as before. Whatever. But this time, because we're sending it using post, none of that information is embedded as in the URL. And so it arrives then as post variables. So this display values page that we've made available for testing, it's displaying all the things in the get super global variable and all the things in the post super global variable. It also displays any cookies that are there, but cookies are another day's work. So next up now, what we're going to do is look at how we would use the values that have been sent to us in a PHP program. Now let's take a look at how we would send data from a form to a PHP script for processing, because that's something we're going to be doing quite a lot. So here I have the HTML file for a page with a form. I have three inputs there, one text input, one email and one text. None of those are required, so we don't have to put anything in there. And now I have here two text inputs, both of which are required. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the string burst function that we wrote some time ago. And you'll recall what string burst does is it takes a string of text and it takes a number, and then it outputs that string and repeats that string that number of times. So if we said *5, it'll go star, 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 star. Okay, so we're going to use string burst to display some information. Now, here in the form, I'm using the post method as opposed to get. It's not really a big deal which one we use. But you notice here that I'm no longer using the test function, the test PHP script that we had that allowed you to send it stuff and have it send the values back to you. Excuse me. Now I'm sending the information from this form to example17 PHP. So what does the receiving end look like here when we go back to example 17? Well, we have string burst there to find. Now, here we have an element in the post superglobal variable that is called repeat text. If we go back to the form, we can see that text to repeat, that input there, its name is repeat text, it's of type text. So the form is going to send 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 name value pairs in, and put those into the post superglobal variable array. So we can extract the piece of information we're looking for by using the name there, repeat text. And so that's what we've done here. So we've post superglobal. The element in repeat text there, that goes into a variable called the text. I'm just copying it into a variable locally just to have it around, okay? We could plug it in directly into the function if we wanted, but I'm not choosing to do that. Similarly, repeat times is in the post superglobal, and it's called repeat times. We can see that here in the name we gave the input. And so the number we put in there will get put into count. And so then all that's happening is we're using string burst, the text, count. So whatever the text is, that'll go in there, and the number of times will go there. So let's see this in action. Here's the form. We don't have to put anything there. I'm going to put in here ho, and I'm going to put in here the value 6. So now ho will be sent to superglobal post repeat text, which will eventually end up in the text, and 6 will go into repeat times, which will end up in count. Let's rock, away we go. It goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So ho gets repeated 6 times. So is there anything else there we need to see? No, I think that's it. So when you click on the form, it uses a post method and completes this action, which basically calls up example17 PHP. An example 17 PHP extracts these two values from the post superglobal variable, plugs them into local variables, which then get plugged into string burst, which repeats the text a set number of times. And there you have it. Aren't we brilliant? Okay, so that's taking stuff from a form and sending it off to a PHP script which can extract the values from the superglobal variable post and do whatever it wants with them. So nothing hugely difficult there, I think, just lots of little small things. And the important point there is to understand how the form connects up to the PHP script that's waiting for the information to arrive, and the connection between the two of those.